I've got the opportunity to talk to you about a terrible drug, RU486, and I want to talk to you about, firstly, its development and in France back in 1980. I want to talk to you about some of the things around the world that have happened, its history, some of the manipulation and the lies and the deceit that go on behind the scenes with this drug. And I want to talk to you about the implications and the problems for women about this drug. And I want to cover especially, so I'm not a medical doctor, I want to cover especially the manipulation and the lies of bureaucratic manipulation and deceit that's gone on to get it now to the stage where you, me, the taxpayer, are paying for it. And I guess I'm just the messenger. I tell people often, you know, most of us are just carrying a message. And I like to illustrate this by a professor in North America who was an expert in the area, he was in field of chemistry. His expertise was in enzymes, you see, and he developed some new formula that revolutionises that whole field. So he went around universities in America and he would give this talk. And in the northeast of the United States, I don't know if you're aware, there's so many cities so close and lots of universities. It was ridiculous to fly, so he'd drive. But driving, he would get tired. So he hired himself a chauffeur to drive himself around all these places. And the chauffeur, turns out, and the professor became good friends. They have a lot in common. They love sport, especially baseball. They talk about that. They're much the same age. They shared a lot of beliefs the same, and they got on very well. They'd have dinners together, etc. And of course, the chauffeur would sit in on the talks that the professor gave all over these places. And after a few months of this, the chauffeur says, you know what? I've seen that talk so often, I reckon I can do it. And the talk involves putting this complicated chemical formula up on a whiteboard and explaining it, speaking to that formula as well. And he says, I can do that. The professor says, no way. He says, sure I can. I'm sure I can. He says, all right. The next week we're going to a university. They know about my work, but they don't know what I look like. You be the professor and I'll be the chauffeur and you do the talk. Righto, and they make a small wager on this. And the time comes, the professor sits in the front row because he wants to see this, and the chauffeur gets up on the stage, gets introduced, and away he goes, including the complicated chemical formula up on the whiteboard and its explanation. And he gets a standing ovation. The professor's dumbfounded, right? Sit there in the front. Then out of the audience comes a local professor, and he writes underneath the chemical formula another complicated chemical formula and says, Professor, I've wanted to ask you, how do you reconcile those two things? But the chauffeur doesn't miss a beat. The professor, sitting in the front, waiting for him now to stumble. The chauffeur says, that is so easy. My chauffeur sitting here in the front seat could explain it to you. The good news for me, when it comes to a lot of the medical implications and problems with RU486, as I'm not a medical doctor, I've got two medical doctors with me. You see, you just heard Andrew and you'll hear Deirdre after me. So you can ask them the medical questions. You can ask me the questions of skullduggery and manipulation and politics, because that's where I'm a little bit more learned. So I want to get started on RU486. Emile Bailou developed this drug, mifepristone, back in 1980, doing trials. He was an advisor to Roussel-Uclaf, a French pharmaceutical company with a history associated to Hearst AG, its parent company, a German company responsible for the production of Zyklon B gas in World War II that was used in the death camps. So they've got a lovely heritage, haven't they? So he used to do work for them, and thousands of trials discovered that this drug was very useful for killing unborn children. And he probably figured, well, that's got appeal, that's going to work, that's going to make money, because that tends to be what seems to drive them. And mifepristone became popular as the abortion drug. It's a progesterone inhibitor. It actually stops the development of the lining of the uterus, and the baby ends up starving to death. Okay, malnutrition is what kills the baby. But he had a problem of the expulsion of the baby. So in combination with a prostaglandin, a drug normally used for stomach ulcers, that also they found causes contractions and would expel the baby. So this combination of drugs, these two drugs, mifepristone and misoprostol, the drug of choice, was then known as, if you like, this abortion drug. A combination of drugs, really. Okay, mifepristone to kill the baby, misoprostol to get rid of the baby. Now, there was a lot of toing and froing about the efficacy and the dangers to women of this drug in France. There was a lot of concerns over actions of particular groups, pro-life groups especially, to cause some financial cost to the drug company promoting it by campaigning against the company and withholding or affecting sales on not just this but other lines. So it wasn't until 1988 that this drug got approval in France. Okay? In the United States, the process, by the way, happened in England in 91, it got approval, and then in 2001 it took to get approval in the United States, 2000. Not before some shenanigans there. The Rockefeller Foundation, I don't know if you know who the Rockefeller Foundation is, you've probably all heard of the Rockefeller family, billionaire family, who have a fund especially that's set up for charitable purposes. This fund's money mostly goes to population control programs, okay? Like a lot of these funds. Ford, Ted Turner's foundation, the Gates Foundation, all these people, that's where their money seems to go. Nothing ever changes, right? The devil's got all the dough. And we're fighting always up against it. So in America, though, the French company Roussillou-Clough was convinced to transfer the patent rights to a Rockefeller-funded organisation, Population Council, who set up another company called Advances in Health Technology. Don't you love it? Advances in Health Technology. That would be the prime distributor and promoter of this drug and hold the licence in the United States. Now, all the time you see they fear the backlash of pro-lifers. So if all these people with all this money are scared of you, isn't that good news? Us poor little old pro-lifers without any money, they're scared of us because we can hurt them in the hip pocket where it matters to them. So they get into bed with a guy called Joseph Pike. Now, Joseph Pike sets up two other companies, Neogen Pharmaceutical and Danco, that will control the distribution, importation, hold the licence, etc. for this drug. They do fundraising. They issue shares in the company. People who are interested in only making money and not ethical considerations invest in it, and they raise $12 million. And lo and behold, 11 million of it goes missing. Then they find out that Joseph Pike's a convicted fraudster, you see, and he's absconded with their dough, and they enter into litigation with him. So all this is happening in the 90s in the United States. I give you that illustration just to tell you the sorts of people and the sorts of, smoke screens they like to throw up and the layers of different corporations that they put together to cover their trail, to promote this filthy drug. All in the name of reproductive health choices for women. So here in Australia during the 90s, we had some of our own shenanigans, you see. I've got a lot of it. By the way, this small folder I've got with information on RU486, I've got about 10 times that much on RU486, the amount that's been written about all this sort of dirty dealing and issues that have gone on in the last 25 odd years with RU486, 30 years, but especially over the last 20 odd, right? Now, Melinda Tankard-Reist, I think most of you probably know who Melinda is, at the time was working for Senator Brian Harradine, and she wrote a research paper for the Southern Cross Bioethics Institute. And she'd unearthed in 1994 in Australia that an unidentified official with the Therapeutic Goods Administration, the TGA, authorised the import of the banned abortion drug RU486. This set in train a series of events culminating in the suspension of an RU486 trial, the ordering of a review into the consent forms used in that trial, and another review into the functions of institutional ethics committees. Now, institutional ethics committees were the people that were giving the advice to the TGA, the public regulator, that a drug was or wasn't any good. Now, interestingly enough, most of these institutional ethics committees are made up of people with vested interests in the particular drugs. Now, in the case of RU486, in Victoria, Victorian Family Planning, and in New South Wales, the New South Wales Family Planning Association were the principal sponsors and members of this so-called ethics committee. Now, funnily enough, they approved it. And the TGA, instead of investigating and doing their job, they would just rubber stamp this process. So the revelation that an official had illegally authorised this trial led to a whole range of things being uncovered. This is your money, by the way, the TGA and all these people, these ethics committees that make these reviews, the funding and the money that goes into all of this, the taxpayers are paying for it. And back in 1994, Carmen Lawrence, Emily's List politician, Labor, was the health minister. She was succeeded by Graham Richardson, also pro-choice, Labor. And in 1996, in Australia, we had an election, and that election led to a change of government, the coalition being elected under John Howard's leadership. Now, it's interesting, you know, many websites I looked at in relation to this, pro-choice. I got hauled over the coals in Melbourne for calling it pro-choice. I'm just saying what they say they are, right? They're pro-abortion. They've never seen an abortion they don't like, these people, right? So I know what they are. But that's how they frame themselves, so don't mistake my intention. These pro-abortion websites like to blame Tony Abbott immediately for the problem, that he was health minister in '96. That's not true. In fact, Dr. Michael Woolridge was health minister back in 1996, and Tony Abbott didn't become health minister till 2003. Okay? A long way down the track. Now, also at that time in 1996, Senator Brian Harradine was still in the federal parliament. And at that time, when John Howard was elected, he wanted to make available the funding to the federal government that would come from the sale of some public utilities, and Telstra being one of them. And the Telstra sale depended on the vote of Senator Brian Harradine in the federal Senate. So a deal was done that the health minister would maintain jurisdiction over the import and licensing of the drug RU486, which had been the case up to then under Labor health ministers, pro-choice Labor health ministers. All right? And so the status quo remained. RU486 remained banned, even though Michael Woolridge was quite happy to endorse abortion and this drug, particularly if he had his own way. Just as an aside, I, as a financial advisor for 27 years, did not think the privatisation of those utilities was a good thing for Australia. And even though I'd probably describe myself pretty much as a free market person, a capitalist with restrictions, that wasn't a good deal for Australia. It was a good deal for the federal government at the time because they filled up the coffers and allowed them to pay down a lot of the debt. Coalition like to brag often about their ability to pay down debt, but it came at the cost of the sale of a lot of public utilities that generated income themselves. I sat at a dinner, I've been involved in politics as well for a long time, and I sat at a dinner with the finance minister in the 90s, not long after that, John Fay, the late 90s, and asked him what will happen when they've finished selling the farm. And he got upset. It's not like that. I said, what's it like? Didn't have an answer. Walked away. So money drives everything in politics. Going back to RU486, so enter Tony Abbott, Health Minister. And by the way, prior to Tony Abbott's appointment as Health Minister, he had a publicly expressed desire to be given the defence portfolio. Dr. Brendan Nelson, medical doctor Brendan Nelson, got the defence portfolio, and poor old Tony Abbott got stuck with health. A lot of people say to me that at least he stood up for principle, and I say he didn't. He enunciated the principle, but he didn't stand up for it. He should have told John Howard where he can put the health portfolio, because he's now signing the cheques paying these abortionists and these drug companies and these criminals the money. And I don't think a Catholic can do that. Would it come at a political cost? Yep, it would. But that would be principle as far as I'm concerned. Okay? I got accused of being a Labor basher in Canberra. I'm thinking, gee whiz, I think I gave it to the Liberal Party a lot more than I did the Labor Party. And I had a lot of years of membership of the Liberal Party, and I know a lot of the internal machinations of political parties and what goes on, and I don't like it. I get asked all the time to join a political party and you should be in politics, and I'd rather get to heaven, I think so. It's a difficult road, I think, if you're in politics, and we have some very good ones, by the way, I think that too. Going back to RU486, and so the major weapon then to push for the legalisation or the removal of RU486 from the Health Minister's jurisdiction was that Tony Abbott's a Catholic and shouldn't be given control over that because he's only got that position because of his faith. Well, that's just ridiculous, right? The science all just went out the window. Health ministers up to then all were opposed to it and all were pro-choice on both sides of politics. That doesn't make sense, but that's what they used. And the push was on, particularly from Liberal MPs, Sharman Stone and Mal Washer. Remember that name, Mal Washer, by the way. And they joined Democrats Lynn Allison and Natasha Stott Despoja, calling for the lifting of the ban on RU486. All these politicians assure us the abortion pill is safe. However, Professor Ralph Meach wrote in the Annals of Pharmacology in September 2005, just before the vote in the Parliament removed the drug from the Health Minister's jurisdiction, he wrote that mifepristone causes changes in the cervix that allow seesaw deli, a common vaginal bacteria, to enter the cervical canal. Dr. Meach explained seesaw deli thrives in this low oxygen environment and derives nutrition from the decaying fetal tissue. He added, seesaw deli infections are rare outside of mifepristone use. Safe drug for women. The second drug, the prostaglandin Cytotec, is an added danger. Dr. Eugene Diamond, Professor of Paediatrics, wrote, prostaglandins are highly active biological compounds which have marked cardiovascular actions requiring close supervision. You might remember the selling point for this drug is how convenient it is for women in remote locations. Hello? I don't think so. And their own behaviour and words put the lie to that, just by the way. It was a selling point, purely a political selling point for what they consider the uneducated masses, us. There were 4 deaths in the United States linked to Clostridium sodeli infections. Now, a lady doctor up in Queensland, you're part of the neck of the woods, but a bit further up than here, Townsville, Carolyn DaCosta, you probably have heard of her, Professor of Obstetrics at James Cook University, but also worked in the public hospital. But she would refer people to a private mill for abortions because elective abortions aren't meant to be done in the public system, you see. Now, she's been an agitator, by the way, for this drug for as long as it's been around, just about. Interesting person who had a child out of wedlock in 1968 when she was overseas in Ireland. She was instrumental in pushing for the legalisation of contraception in Ireland, by the way. She contemplated an abortion, she says, back then, but decided to have that child, Jerome, who was tragically killed in 1986 at only 17 years of age. But she had 7 children in all herself. So she's a bit of a contradiction in a lot of ways. But she's always been an agitator for these type of things, and she was very instrumental behind the scenes right through this process in pushing for the legalisation of this filthy drug. And those politicians that put up the bill, she had a lot of influence on them. Now, she says, relating to those deaths in the United States, describing the deaths as disturbing and tragic. The Costa accepts there may be problems down the track we haven't foreseen. That's ridiculous, right? This is someone that's been hard at peddling this drug, admitting there could be problems we haven't foreseen. Use of RU486 in Australia needs to be carefully monitored as per the conditions of her prescribing licence, which she's had for a while, which must be renewed periodically by the TGA, requires her to report any adverse effects in patients. She says, after the administration of this, when it was taken out, by the way, the vote in the Parliament went against us on the discretion of the licensing of RU486 in this country, and it was taken out of the Health Minister's hands, put in the TGA's hands early 2006. And of course that was always going to happen. The TGA approved it for use and issued licences. Now those licences were quite expensive things to get, and there wasn't a lot of doctors really keen on spending the money. They weren't going to really ever recoup that, even if they were prepared to refer. Something like 187 licences around the country in the 6 years from 06 to 12 were given. Okay? And something like 22,500 medical abortions were done in that time, in that 6 years. Given that the overall abortion numbers for those same 6 years was probably 600,000 or more, as a percentage that's low, given the take-up rate for this drug, this combination of drugs in other jurisdictions like UK and United States. Okay? So she says, Da Costa will follow a similar treatment regime with most patients sent home after being dosed with misoprostol on their second visit to her colleague's private clinic. Strictly on the proviso, they have a partner or friend who has been approved at the clinic to keep watch over them. That means anybody that comes in with them probably keeps watch over them. Girlfriends, friends, boyfriends, husbands, mum, whoever, right? Not whether or not they're capable of looking after them in the case of an emergency. Typically blunt, she adds, there's no point hanging around waiting for the kettle to boil. Now she's talking about serious risk of adverse events for mum and the certain death of the unborn child, and she can be as callous in her disregard as to express it that way. These are the people we're dealing with. These are the people we're dealing with. Gail Instance, the founder of Human Life International, which became Family Life International, many of you know, has always said there's a lot of people want to get involved in the abortion debate, and they need to know the enemy. You need to know who these people are. You need to know what drives them. Okay? These are dangerous drugs. This is not good for women. This is 100% fatal for unborn children. Now here in Australia, we've had our own instance of adverse effects. And by the way, the 22,500, so I've got so much stuff here. Sorry, the 22,500 pill abortions in Australia in that 6 years, there was close to 1,000 adverse events. Some of them severe, some of them not as severe. Reported events, that is, those that are reported. Medical abortion death confirmed by the TGA. So in 2012 we learned, back in 2010, what took them 2 years, there was a death in Australia of a woman given the abortion pill cocktail at a Marie Stopes clinic. Now, I should tell you, Marie Stopes, Andrew Fung, you heard talk about Margaret Sanger, and Margaret Sanger established the International Planned Parenthood Federation, of which the family planning associations around this country are affiliate organisations. Margaret Sanger also encouraged a woman in England, Marie Stopes, to set up the same thing in England, which she did. Marie Stopes International now is here in Australia as an international abortion provider and peddler of all things contraceptive and abortifacient. Marie Stopes originally, I think it was the late 90s, they turned up here. They've been buying up abortion mills around the place and have quite a number now in Sydney and other places, and it's somewhere between 10 and 15, I think they have. They closed down a couple and rationalised them, built bigger places, you see. Now, Marie Stopes is an important consideration in this whole program. So we'll just cover this bit. Medical abortion death confirmed by the TGA. It was reported the woman died from Group A Streptococcus sepsis, a severe bacterial infection of the bloodstream, some days after being prescribed a regimen of 2 drugs, RU486 and misoprostol, from a Marie Stopes International Australia clinic. Clostridium sodeli is present in the vagina in 5% of all women, up to 29% of women after pregnancy loss. So you can see it's far more likely women taking this drug are going to have this bacteria and suffer adverse events. Since 2001, at least 21 women worldwide have died from fatal complications, including hemorrhage, toxic shock, sepsis, organ failure, ruptured ectopic pregnancy following early medical abortion with this combination of drugs. In that same time, 11 of those 21 have been from toxic shock, infection, most of them Clostridium sodeli infections. Carolyn DaCosta, remember? There may be some complications we haven't foreseen. Oh, duh. Okay, there is. Now, remember Mal Washer. Before I do that, so Marie Stopes goes and sets up a subsidiary company of Marie Stopes International Australia, the abortion provider, Marie Stopes Health, as a pharmaceutical company. This pharmaceutical company gets not-for-profit status. That means you are helping fund them, the taxpayer, because not-for-profit status means that any profits aren't subject to taxation in Australia. And those profits can be funneled where they like, back to the parent and to programs promoting these filthy programs of theirs. We at Family Life International would like to have not-for-profit status, but we can't get it. You know why? Because we have a position opposed to abortion. We say it's wrong. We have a firm position opposed to abortion. We're not just involved in education. Well, hello, what about Marie Stopes? They've got a firm position too. It's all good. They get it, we don't. The bad guys have got all the dough, right? Same thing. They've got all the legislators and controls as well. We can't get that. Now, Marie Stopes, through their agitation, have influenced, it seems, the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, the last stage, you see now, this drug that they were, if you went to one of their abortion mills up to last year, it would they were charging people $450 for these medical abortions, which, given that it was meant to be for the first 9 weeks of pregnancy, is as expensive, all right, as a surgical abortion. With a failure rate, one study, the Boston Medical School, reckons it was as high as 23% failure rate. So where women would still have to go back often and have a surgical procedure, increase the cost, where there's all these other complications and problems they could face. $450. So they know that's not going to be very popular with a lot of people, and they want it to be popular. So that if they could get it onto the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, the taxpayer's paying all the dough. You mugs. Then it can be sold for $36 in combination, those two drugs. Or if you've got a healthcare card, it means if you're a low income earners, pensioners, etc., you could get it for $11.90 actually, to take 2 pills, go home, have an abortion at home. No one's mentioned the psychological trauma of women given birth to 7, 8, 9 week dead babies at home in the toilet or on their beds or whatever. How's that going to go? What about the psychological impact on these poor women who've been given this drug? So they just need this to get past the PBS committee. They have a committee that makes recommendation as to whether or not this should go on the scheme and be funded by the taxpayers. Then they can take all the money. And by the way, this $450 combination drug, the mifepristone $300 version, they like the $300 version. There are generic versions which could be as cheap as $60. But they want us to foot the full cost, right? The full freight, the really expensive one, right? And so they only need us to be able to pay that, and they'll make the money, and the taxpayer will foot the bill. And Marie Stopes Health puts between themselves and the patient at risk another layer. The doctors making the recommendations and referring who are going to be trained by Marie Stopes, by the way, they will be in the gun to be sued, not Marie Stopes, which is providing the thing, which provide this. The doctors must identify all the risk factors, which I'll come to, and there are many. A lot of people don't understand the not-for-profit. By the way, Marie Stopes doesn't seem too happy with a lot of other abortion mills around the country, because we pray at a place in Sydney called Preterm Foundation, which is the oldest registered abortion mill in New South Wales, one of the oldest in the country. A place in Victoria and it are the oldest too, right? Now this woman who's a nurse there, and told me she's a Catholic too, by the way, and she came out one day and she says to me, why don't you go and picket, she calls it picketing, we call it praying, right? Why don't you go and picket Marie Stopes? We're just a small not-for-profit organisation. I said, you're talking to the wrong man. I'm a financial advisor, I know what that means. That's just tax status. You're working for nothing? You're doing it for free? I said, and even if you were, I still want to shut you down. You're killing babies. She didn't seem to like all that. I said, I also know what Marie Stopes is about. She wanted me to go to them, you see. They're a multinational organisation. They can afford it. Go and see them. Go and pick it. I said, we'll get to them when we've finished with you. They don't like that kind of. They stopped talking to me, so. So Marie Stopes are on the verge of this breakthrough that's going to be very profitable for them, very expensive for the taxpayers, and very dangerous for women in Australia. And here enter Mal Washer, again in the federal parliament, now in opposition. He says this, back on the 18th of March this year. I rise to speak to an issue of great importance to the health of this nation. My concern this is not what you think. My concern arises out of the overt politicisation of the function of the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, the guardian of our pharmaceutical benefits scheme. The PBS has until recently been the reference point for all countries with reimbursed medicines programs. The PBAC met on the last 3 days of last week to consider submissions lodged at a significant cost to sponsoring companies. A major submission cost a company as much as $121,000 in fees alone. I can tell you, by the way, for Marie Stopes to grant approval through the TGA cost them $335,000. They've got a lot of money to recoup, right? Apart from all the direct and indirect costs associated with mounting these submissions, none of these fees or costs, incidentally, are invested back in the PBS. Yet the former Health Minister, Nicola Roxon, told this Parliament savings were needed to create headroom for desperately needed new medicines on the PBS, which are now not reaching the PBS. So drugs that ought to be there, probably, drugs, real drugs that help people with real illnesses, aren't getting put on this scheme, and this does. He goes on in this speech, recorded in the Hansard, by the way, as further evidence of a complete disregard for the integrity and professionalism of the PBAC, 3 respected members of the committee, who between them have given almost 20 years of service, were quietly and unceremoniously let go from the committee earlier this year. Hello? That's before the recommendation to put it on the PBS. This happened without any recognition being accorded these members, and without any transparency and notification. The names of the 3 new appointees were not made public, even on the department's own website. So possibly, I'm not saying for sure, but I'm very suspicious, and you should be too, these 3 members might not have approved RU486, mifepristone and misoprostol as drugs to be added to the PBS. And for the taxpayer to fund these abortions, I reckon that's a good chance. And 3 mysterious new members are added, no names mentioned. I'd like to know those names too. We will find them and we'll let you know. That's pretty sick, right? They take us for idiots. Around this country right now, they are flooding parliaments with anti-life bills. New South Wales, 2 days ago, a euthanasia bill was defeated. They still have before it the gay marriage so-called bill, the redefinition of marriage bill. Tasmania is probably debating, if not this week, next week, because it passed the lower house, the upper house in Tasmania will be debating whether or not to increase women's access to abortion, which is already in Tasmania basically unlimited. All you need is the approval of 2 doctors, one being an obstetrician. Let me tell you, that's not hard to get anywhere in Australia, and you can have an abortion for any reason. So the real reason for the new bill in Tasmania was to take it from the Crimes Act and put it under the Health Act. Make it not criminal anymore, except if you're pro-lifer. If you walk past with a 40 Days for Life shirt on, or anything that's pro-life, you can get arrested, go to jail, 12 months, $65,000. Thanks for coming. I asked Bishop Julian Porteous, is an auxiliary bishop in Sydney and is our patron. I said, if I'm in Tasmania and I get arrested, my Lord, will you visit me? He said, of course. It's a corporal work of mercy. Thank you. Maybe we need some of the bishops to go there and get arrested. That would cause the stink. Monsignor Philip Riley, the founder of the Helpers of God's Precious Infants, back in the 1970s got arrested. This is a bright man, right? Rector of the seminary in Brooklyn, teaches the classics in the seminary, plays chess at the level of Grand Master, the best in the world, right? Bright fellow, bright future. Got arrested. His friends, the priesthood, told him, that's it for you, Riley, now you'll never become a bishop. And he said, what do you mean? When did they change the rules? I thought you had to get arrested. What about our Lord? What about the apostles? See? Anyway, maybe that's just my diversions. I like to go off in little diversions. Maria will rouse soon. There you have it. The PBS have said it's okay. It's a good drug for women. They backed up Carolyn DaCosta and Mari Stopes. And you are going to be the ones funding this. And all it needs is the approval now of the Health Minister. Do you know the Health Minister? Tanya Plibersek? Emily's List? Let's think about that. She's going to approve it. In fact, she's been agitating for the approval of this for a long time. So if she doesn't, it'll be like a miracle. Now, Mari Stopes on their website, if you go there, have this consumer information on mifepristone, another one like that for misoprostol. Here's some of the things that you must not be given it for, if or when you must not be given it. You should not be given it if you are pregnant and wish to carry your pregnancy to term. It's nice of them. You have any allergies to mifepristone or any other ingredients listed at the end of this leaflet. You suffer from chronic adrenal failure. You suffer from severe disease where it is necessary to take steroids like asthma uncontrolled by treatment. You have known or suspected hypocoagulation diseases. You are on an anticoagulant therapy. You are allergic to prostaglandins. You should also not be given it if your pregnancy has not been confirmed by a pregnancy test or an ultrasound scan. The first day of your last period was more than 49 days ago. They've cut it down to 7 weeks, by the way, for this approval. Unless tests have been done to confirm the age of the pregnancy. Your doctor suspects an ectopic pregnancy. There's a whole lot of other stuff. There's also the same amount of information for the other one, G-miso, the misoprostol. How many girls, like, have you ever talked to girls going into abortion mills? I talked to thousands of them. Thousands, seriously. I'll be probably one of the leading experts in Australia on what women are like right at death's door, because I've spoken to thousands of them. By the way, they all say, universally they say to me, they don't all talk to me, bear in mind, the ones that have, and that's thousands. We have no choice. What? I thought that's what this is all about. We give the choices. We're the ones giving them choices. We're the ones saying we'll help you. And I tell you, the emotional, the traumatised state these women are in, going in there, they're not going to read this stuff. They're not going to pay attention to that. How could they? And the people pushing for the abortion, and now, instead of $450 or $500 with some Medicare subsidy, you can get it for $12. Let me think, what one will I take? What are they going to want? The cheap fix? The expensive fix? By the way, I'm not an advocate for surgical abortion. It's not good either for women or the baby. 100% fatal. But the women are going to choose the pill, and the licensing procedure, the educational program that doctors have to undergo and pharmacists, is run by Marie Stopes online. You get exemptions if you're an obstetrician. Deirdre doesn't have to do it. You see? They control everything. I'd be surprised if the educational programs doesn't come with some cost as well, because they're about money. It's all about money. Follow the money trail. We can't just lay down and take all this. And as I was saying, they've run this program, they've done all this. This has all gone under the radar pretty much in Australia over the last few years because they keep throwing these anti-life bills into Parliament. They're debating whether fertile women can have access to IVF now, whether to make it legal for fertile women to have IVF procedures in South Australia. Why do you think that is? Lesbians want IVF, right? They've got this bill in Tasmania. They're throwing this legislation at parliaments around Australia and keeping us busy. This isn't an accident that all this is happening. That euthanasia bill was never going to succeed in New South Wales. What's it all about? Two things. The smokescreen for this, the fact that they want to keep us busy, and if you keep doing it, you keep winning people around. Andrew Fung talked about the doctor for expressing on an online blog his opposition to abortion was hauled over the coals. Yet Philip Nitschke, Dr. Philip Nitschke, runs around the country not only advocating euthanasia, which is illegal around the country, but telling people how to do it. Why isn't he struck off at least? Why isn't he in jail, is what I want to know. I got to debate Philip Nitschke ages ago on television, Channel 7 in Sydney. That was a lot of fun. He's hopeless, just by the way. If you get to debate him, don't worry about it. He's got nothing. I've got an uncle who's a surgeon and was involved in the AMA for a lot of years. And I spoke to him for ages before because I was a bit worried about it, that there's some medical things I won't know. He's got nothing. A priest rang me on the way home. He said, Hanrahan 1, Nitschke 0. He doesn't come back for a second go. But he gets away with it. But doctors can't speak out about abortion. Doctors like Mark Hobart can't say to a woman who wants an abortion because it's the particular sex, I'm not going to refer you for that, without getting hauled over the coals. Mark Hobart was at our talk, Dr. Mark Hobart, if you know about him. was at our talk in Melbourne. It was good to meet him and make that contact. This stuff stinks, ladies and gentlemen. We need a national organisation that can attend to these things. We need an organisation like Family Life International that can sniff out this stuff and make it public and educate people about it. We need an organisation that can get to the good politicians and inform them of this. We need an organisation that can say to politicians when they're in the glare of the lights of the hostile media, do not back down because of your faith. Do not back down on principle. Here's how you deal with it. John Anderson, the former Deputy Prime Minister, joined our advisory panel because that's what I want to be able to do. He likes that idea himself and he agrees with me. They seem to lack all integrity because they go to water. And right now, the alternate Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, has done everything he can to make himself woman-friendly, or what is seen to be woman-friendly in the mainstream media. And he's endorsed contraception, IVF and abortion, not anything he said publicly himself particularly, but through the women in his life. Wife, daughters, Chief of Staff Peter Credlin, Deputy Julie Bishop. They've said he says this, and he's not denied. That means he did, by the way. If he's not going to publicly refute those things, he needs to stand by them. It's a campaign. I will bet pounds to peanuts. It's got John Howard, as far as I'm concerned, written all over it, by the way. Mr. Pragmatism himself. The political scene is a dangerous place for the novices, and there are a lot of them. In New South Wales, a very good man in the Parliament, completely opposed to abortion, by the way, Fred Nile, put up 5 bills last year. I oppose all of those bar one. Family Life International opposes them, so does New South Wales Right to Life, by the way. Dr. Simon McCaffrey, obstetrician, head of New South Wales Right to Life, told me to tell Fred that. And I spent an hour telling him why we oppose it and what's wrong with it. New South Wales, like Queensland, has laws making abortion illegal. The fact they're doing it, despite that, is another issue. Laws like the bills Fred's put up, if he put them up in Victoria, I'd support, just by the way. That'd be a different thing. Each legislature has its own issues, and there are national implications from every single one. The Madigan bill to stop funding for sex selection abortion, I also don't like. These aren't immoral things. I think they're imprudent. There is no separate item number on the Medicare schedule for abortion. So how do you identify any particular abortion, let alone a sex selection abortion? And I'm sure they happen here, just by the way. We know they happen here. Mark Hobart said so. But they're not the major reason. But if an abortionist, know your enemy, remember, if an abortionist had someone come, want the abortion because it's a girl or a boy, they're not going to say that, especially if they're not going to get funding for it. These people are killers, right? They don't mind lying. No one's owning up for this. How's that going to work ever, anyway? But if you make them have an item number for abortion, instead of the item number that's used for common gynecological and obstetric problems. I spoke to Simon McCaffrey yesterday. He said he used that number twice himself the day before for legitimate procedures. Because women who have miscarriages or blighted ovum or those sorts of things, that's the same item number. That's why we don't know the number. Let's cause Medicare, and this is arguable very much. It's going to be very hard for these other people. If this is the most common medical procedure women undergo in Australia, if this is a woman's right, if it's legal around the country in many jurisdictions, and it is, we should have that. Then put up the sex selection and a whole lot of other ones. Age of the baby, a whole lot of stuff you can put up, and when they don't own up to it, you can get them for Medicare fraud. That's like getting Al Capone for tax evasion, right? Put him in jail, off the street. We want them in jail, off the street. Medicare fraud's a serious offence. A serious offence. The judiciary are not going to convict these people for killing unborn babies when it's illegal. I have countless examples. I've got women who'd be able to testify it was going to be an illegal abortion or was an illegal abortion in New South Wales. because it wasn't, no psychiatric testing ever done, it wasn't for that reason, right? They're going to go mad in a minute because I'm not getting off. I needed to make these points. It's important that whatever gets done is thought through properly. The other thing with a piece of legislation in the federal parliament that endorses or disendorses a particular form of abortion, a rare one, would endorse everything else by implication. And that would cause the people in the New South Wales Parliament, the Greens and the mad lefties in the Parliament, in all parties, to agitate for the decriminalisation of abortion and have a good argument to do it. They've been doing that for 10 years down there, and probably up here, the same thing. They don't like those laws, even though they're ignored. Why don't they like those laws? Law educates, law persuades, laws inform, laws matter. We want that law to stay there in New South Wales, and sometime in the future we'll get them on those laws. In the meantime, let's get them for Medicare fraud and anything else. Let's think this stuff through. I didn't put together a very competent, very, professional advisory panel at FLI made up of doctors, lawyers, theologians, politicians, etc., for no reason. We need those people. They are all actively involved in our organisation. We need to grow. We need to have a mouthpiece for us in this country against these criminals and stop this stuff happening. God bless you all. Thank you.